Well, hello. We're moving along nicely now with the Stanwell pipe, and I believe that this is going to be the last video in the series. Fair amount left to do, but you've seen me do a lot of things like staining and that sort of stuff, cleaning up the stem. The last time we talked, I had just put the insert, I just epoxied the insert in place. Excuse me. I just epoxied the insert in place. I've sawn that off flush, sanded the surface down carefully so I didn't take the end here out of square, and I put a little bit of a chamfer in there. So this is good, and I'm really pleased with the way this has come out. It's reestablished a round on this hole. It seems to be very nicely reinforcing the crack there. The crack is completely closed up now. There's no evidence of anything there except a little bit of staining still from the glue, which I've yet to sand out. Now on the stem I've done a fair amount of work, and I apologize for not filming all of this, but it was a lot of lathe work and I didn't really want to go and set the camera up by the lathe just yet. I'll do that at some point because I want to show you my buffing setup over there as well. But right now the shop is just not in a state where I can easily move the camera around. But what I did was I reduced the size of the tenon down to a 1/4 inch to match the 1/4 inch that I have here. Two things I might have left out in the last video. The way that I made this insert was pretty simple. I mean, I took a piece of cherry, I turned it round, I drilled a 1/4 inch hole down the center of it, and then I turned the exterior of that until it fit the opening. So it was basically turning around a 1/4 inch hole, knowing that I was going to then turn the tenon down to a 1/4 inch. Now that does leave us with a relatively thin walled tenon, and I'm not terribly happy with that because it is a potential break point on the pipe. But again, this is going to be treated very gently. This pipe is staying in my collection and not going anywhere, so I'm okay with doing things like that for my own pipes if I know that there are potential problems and I know how to treat them. So what I did was I actually made a mock-up out of a scrap piece of Delrin. And I did that primarily because I wanted to see the walls of the tenon. I wanted to convince myself that they were not too thin because, you know, this is a 1/4 inch tenon with an 1/8 inch hole through the middle of it. So these walls are only a 1/16 of an inch thick, but it's still plenty of structural stability there, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. I also used it to set up this little tenon turning tool, and you can get these from a couple of different places. This one is from a company called Pimo Pipes, which I've mentioned previously. They've got a lot of really nice pipe making supplies. There's other sites such as Pipe Makers Emporium that also sells these, and if I remember, I'll try to put a couple of links down in the description to these sites in case anyone's interested. And the way this works is really simple. You mount the stem in a lathe or in a drill press. You ensure that the hole here is 1/8 inch, which actually for most tenons will have to be drilled out a bit, and you really do want to make sure that that is 1/8 of an inch because you want this center post to fit in quite nicely. And then what happens is if you're doing it on a lathe, this stays stationary while the stem turns, and you just move them together, and this piece right in here, let me get a pointer here. This triangular piece here is a carbon cutter. Carbon is not the right word, it'll come to me. And it will, it's very sharp, it cuts very nicely, and it cuts both at this point, which is going to help form the tenon, and that's how thick the wall of the tenon is going to be, the distance from this center post to the point of this triangle. But it also cuts on this edge here. So in addition to cutting the circumference of the tenon, it cuts that shoulder square to the tenon. So you know you're going to get a nice square fit in there. So it's a really nice tool. If you don't have a metal lathe, which I don't, this is an ideal tool. You can use it. You can actually use it in a hand drill. A drill press is probably the best option if you don't have a wood lathe or a metal lathe. I use a wood lathe for it because I can get everything concentric very easily. Excuse me, got a bit of a cough today. So I used this on the original Stanwell stem and turned the tenon down to a 1/4 inch. Put a bit of a chamfer in the end after that was done, and it now fits with a relatively snug fit, just like we'd like it to. And the good thing is, although we've moved things around a little bit, because if you remember those holes were off center, the fit is actually fairly good. What I was most worried about was this surface right here, and they mate almost perfectly. I mean, there's a little bit of a ridge there that I can barely feel. I'm having trouble getting it aligned here, but the fit is actually good. It has moved a bit, so this surface here might be a little bit too close there. So if I just use this to show you, this is a little bit proud here, so I will be sanding this down a bit to match that. And on the opposite side, you know, this is okay. It's not aligned properly, but this is okay. On this side here, the side opposite that one that was a little bit proud, is the stem is a little bit proud. So what we'll be doing is we'll be sanding the stem on this side and the briar on this side and bringing that all flush again. But importantly, the Stanwell logo side is fine. It's relatively flush, and I won't have to do any sanding on that. The fit is relatively good. It's not perfect, but it's you know, in terms of keeping this pipe for myself, this is good enough. I'm happy with the results. So we basically went and repaired a factory defect that was leading to the demise of this pipe, and while it was a bit more work than I had hoped to do on this pipe, it does mean that this will continue to be you know, intact for years to come. So I'm happy about that. So after I finish the stem, this will be put together. Final sanding will be done. There'll be a bit of shaping done on the briar and on the stem, and I won't show that because you've seen me sand enough. And then we'll be staining this and buffing it out. So we're very close to done with this. The last big job on this pipe is to fix these holes. And to do that, I am going to use a trick that you may have seen, using a product from Stuart McDonald, I'm sorry. Stuart McDonald is a supplier for luthiers, makers of stringed instruments. And I actually knew about them because I used to make stringed instruments. I've made a few ukuleles and a mandolin. And yeah, it's a great hobby. It's the kind of thing I like, small fiddly things. But it takes a lot of time, and I just haven't been able to keep up with it. But they make a lot of things like this, and this is a black cyanacrylate glue. So it's pigmented. It can be used when you're doing inlays in ebony to fix like mother of pearl in place, and it will fill in the gaps, and then you can sand it off and you will not be able to see the line or the gap between the mother of pearl and the ebony. So it's really good for things like that. It can also be used in ebony fingerboards or the headstock pieces. It also, because it builds and it dries or cures to an acrylic-like substance, can be used to fill in holes like this in a vulcanite or black acrylic stem. So to do this, what we're going to do, and I'm going to zoom in a bit to hopefully make this a bit easier to see. Hopefully not blow the focus completely. So I have to put a barrier in here so that the glue doesn't fill the airway. And what I've done is I've taken a few pieces of the ever-present old business card, because they're very useful for this sort of thing. And you know, I'm going to be able to slide those in. I've cut this so that it's, you know, narrow enough to fit in the airway, and then there's a bit of a taper on the end so that it, you know, fits in tight in that funnel. I've got another piece here that I'm going to put behind it just to brace it. And keep in mind, I have to do this on both sides, so I'm going to be doing this for a while. I won't make you watch. I've also taken a small piece of packing tape. This is just standard packing tape, which now has fingerprints all over it, but that's okay. And again, I have cut this, let's see if I can show you. I've cut this relatively narrow, and I've put a point on it so that I can get it up into that airway. And I'm going to just carefully slide that with the sticky side up right now into the airway. Push it in as far as it'll go. And then I'm just going to stick that on the button just temporarily, just so that I could get my finger off of it. Now I'll take that first card and put it in behind, and as I'm putting the card in, I'm applying some upward pressure and just sealing the tape up to the inside of the airway. And now I'll put this doubled over piece of card behind it just to kind of stuff it in and fill in the space. So what I've done now is I've created a dam in here where the tape is, at least in theory, affixed to the underside of this hole in the airway. The card is there just holding it in place. The glue will not stick very well to the tape. If it does, I can easily pull that off. And now I'm going to find something that I can prop this up with. Drill bit handy. Try to get that relatively level. Like it to be a bit higher than that. Yeah, that's actually pretty good. I want to keep this level so that I can, sorry, that's actually washing out the picture quite a bit because it's white. I want to keep it level so that the glue stays in place. And now we're going to put a pool of glue in that hole. Now I don't want to put too much on. I can't fill the hole all at once. This is going to have to be done in steps. So we'll just drip a bit in there. Oh, that's actually more than I wanted to put in, but that'll be okay. Clean off the top before you put the cap on. Helps the glue keep from curing in the vial. And I'm using a bit of paper towel just to draw some of that out because I'd like to not have it terribly thick right now. Okay, and the idea is that that will now cure. It will be low, but that's okay. We're going to build this up in layers. So we'll let that cure at least a couple of hours, and then I'll come back and put another coat on. And I will continue to do that until I have a sort of dome of super glue that is proud of the surface, that I can file down, sand down, and basically recreate that portion of the stem. Once that's done, I will flip it over, insert another piece of tape on the other side, and repeat the process. So this will take me probably, well, if I have full days to work, it'll take me a day or two. I don't know that I'm going to be able to every couple of hours be working on this, so I don't expect this to be done very quickly, but these kind of things do take time, and that's okay. We'll get it done eventually. However, I will bring you back as soon as it is completed, and it should only take you a second, so talk to you soon. Alright folks, we are moving along here. We've done 3 to 4 layers of the black cyanoacrylate glue on each side. On this side you can see I have not done anything yet, and you can see the big blob of glue there that's covering the hole. The card and tape trick worked quite well. I mean, the airways, I'm putting this pin in, the airway is completely open and smooth, so there's no issues in there. On this side I've begun to sand down the patch. You can see the patch is still evident. I've still got some work to do on that. Did a little bit of reshaping on that junction with the button just to make sure that that is keeping geometry correct. So I will continue to sand and polish that, and I'll bring you back when it's done on both sides and we're ready to put it back on the pipe. Well, friends, we are done. We have completed the restoration project on this Stanwell bent Bulldog, and overall I'm fairly pleased with the results. It's not perfect, as we've discussed. There were some major issues with this pipe, and the goal wasn't to restore this simply to a state where I could safely keep it and occasionally smoke it, not necessarily to make it like new. The stem repair is reasonable. You can actually see the patch. This was such a large hole that it would be difficult to get it completely invisible. On the underside, where the hole was much smaller, we've done a much better job. And I could probably, with a few more applications of the black superglue and sanding, I could probably get rid of some of these marks on the upper surface. But it's a smooth patch. It's just showing some of the lines around the edges, but even with dragging a needle across the surface, I can't feel them, so it's a discoloration rather than an imperfection. Just so you know, to shape that, the tools that I used were really pretty simple. For the most part, I used these two, which are just simple nail files. You know, one is a fairly coarse, inexpensive nail file, and this is one of these shaper polisher nail files that you can pick up at the drugstore, and they work really well. This is nice because it's flexible and it has some give in it, so you can get around corners with it. So really simple tools. For cutting the button, since I was just cutting through the super glue, I primarily use these two small needle files, both of which have cutting edges and safe edges, which allow me to get right up against the button without damaging it, and vice versa, get well, both sides. So I can cut along the stem up to the button without damaging the button, and I can also cut along the button without damaging the stem. So these safe edge files are really useful for those sorts of things. And this is just from a set of needle files. I think it's actually a Craftsman set. So pretty simple tools to get that done. And then the stem was brought up to, through the normal sanding procedure. I started with 220 in the areas that were being repaired, and went through the normal all the way up the grits and buffed it and so on. The stummel was stained. I did a two-part contrast stain on this. I started off with a black to stain the grain, and as I mentioned, there were these burn marks around the edge. So what I did was I put a second coat of black on and sanded the stummel down with 400 and then 600 grit after the black. After the first coat of black, the whole stummel. After the second coat, I did not sand this rim, so I sanded everything else. So that left a bit more black stain up on here to help mask those burn marks, and I think it did a fairly good job. I mean, they blend in fairly well with the grain. And then I followed that with a light, a medium walnut stain. And then just buffed, polished and waxed it on the buffer. So overall, I'm pleased with the results. I hope you agree. It's certainly is a smokable pipe, not something I'd want to go on mile-long walks with once again, but for an occasional smoke and just to be able to reminisce about the sentimental value of this pipe, I'm quite pleased with the way it's all turned out, and at least it's back into occasional working order once again. So I hope you enjoyed following this restoration. It was a lot of fun doing it and sharing it with you. If you did enjoy it, please like the video. If you have any comments or suggestions for different ways to do this, I'd love to hear about it, or questions as well. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. And if you're a subscriber, I thank you. If you'd like to subscribe, please feel free to click on the subscribe button, and you'll be able to catch up on future projects and follow them as we go along. So thank you for the time you took to watch this. I really do appreciate it. I hope you've enjoyed it and maybe learned something, and I'll look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care now.